Looking back, I think the moment I knew something was wrong wasn't when I found the texts. It wasn't when I noticed she'd started wearing perfume just to run errands. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary as any other, when my wife looked up from her coffee and smiled at me. And I felt absolutely nothing from her. Not warmth, not irritation, just the mechanical politeness of someone smiling at a stranger who happens to live in their house. That was 3 years ago. I was 42. Her name was Lena. We met in our late 20s at a conference in Chicago. She was sharp, funny, the kind of woman who could walk into any room and immediately figure out who mattered. I thought that was confidence. I didn't understand yet that it was something closer to calculation. We dated for 2 years, got married in a vineyard in Napa because her mother wanted that, and moved into a house in the suburbs of Columbus because her father knew a developer who gave us a deal. Everything in our life together had an invisible string attached to someone in her family. Her brother, Colt, was the one I had the most trouble with from the start. He'd never done anything I could point to, never outright rude, never said anything I could quote back. But he had a way of looking at me when I spoke at family dinners, like I was mispronouncing a word in a language I shouldn't have been speaking in the first place. He worked in commercial real estate and made sure you knew it within 4 minutes of meeting him. His wife, Priya, was pleasant enough, but always seemed faintly embarrassed to be in the same room as anything ordinary. Their house was 40 minutes from ours. We saw them twice a month, minimum, because Lena's mother, Diane, scheduled it that way. Diane ran the family with the organizational precision of a military officer and the emotional range of a toll booth. She didn't ask about your life. She assessed it. She'd look at the car you drove, the neighborhood you lived in, the career trajectory you were on, and file you somewhere in her mental spreadsheet. I had been filed under performing asset from approximately our second meeting. I was a structural engineer. Good at it, well compensated, steady. None of those things registered as impressive to Diane, who seemed to believe the only legitimate form of success was the kind that required a blazer and a logo. My father-in-law, Gerald, was quieter. The kind of quiet that means you've just decided not to bother anymore. He nodded along to whatever Diane said and occasionally patted me on the shoulder in a way that felt like an apology on behalf of his entire family. Lena and I had 2 kids together. A daughter, Nina, who was 9 at the time all of this happened, and a son, Eli. Wait. No, I can't use that name. I'll call him Braden. 7 years old, endlessly energetic, obsessed with dinosaurs. Lena had done a competent job of loving the children the way she did everything else, efficiently, with the right amount of visible effort. I don't doubt she loved them, but I increasingly doubted she loved anything that required her to be inconvenient. I had suspected something was off for about 8 months before I found anything concrete. The signals were there. A second phone that she explained as a work requirement. Late evenings at yoga, the way she'd physically recoil if I touched her unexpectedly, like I'd startled her out of a life she was living somewhere else. I'm not the jealous type by nature. I think that's actually what let it go on as long as it did. I kept finding the most generous explanation for each thing and filing it away. Then one Saturday in October, Braden knocked over a tray of stuff Lena had left on the bedroom dresser. I was cleaning it up and found a key card, not a hotel key card, a residential building access card, the kind you'd use to get into an apartment complex. It had a small sticker on it with a building code I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything. I took a photo of it on my phone, put it back exactly where I found it, and then went and helped Braden find his sneakers. That night, after the kids were in bed, I did something I probably should have done months earlier. I sat down and started being methodical about it. I'm an engineer. Methodical is what I do. I'd pulled up public records, cross-referenced the building code on the key card with property listings, and had a building address in the short north neighborhood of Columbus within 40 minutes. Then I called the private investigator I found to a trusted colleague, a woman named Rita, who had 30 years of experience and the manner of someone's firm but fair aunt. I hired her the next morning. What Rita gave me over the following 3 weeks was not, as I had half-hopped, a misunderstanding. It was documentation. Photographs. Timestamps. The man my wife had been seeing for approximately 14 months was named Gordon Pice, senior account director at the marketing firm that handled one of the companies Lena consulted for. He was 48, twice divorced, wore expensive watches, and had the kind of jaw that probably mattered to someone. He had an apartment in that short north building. Lena had a key. Rita also handed me a thick envelope and said, before I opened it, "Some of this is going to hurt in ways you don't expect. Take a minute before you read it." She was right. What hurt most wasn't Gordon. It was that based on her surveillance and what she could piece together from Lena's public social media and some discreet inquiries, Lena had been talking about leaving me for at least 6 months. Not leaving, repositioning. She had, according to one conversation Rita had managed to partially capture at a coffee shop, told a friend that she was waiting until the numbers made sense. The numbers: 13 years of marriage, 2 children, a mortgage I'd been carrying the primary weight of for 4 years while Lena's consulting work had slowed. And she was waiting until the numbers made sense. I closed the envelope. I thanked Rita. I drove home and made dinner for my kids. I want to be clear about something. I did not immediately blow everything up. I know that's what people expect in these stories. The confrontation, the explosion, the dramatic you have until morning to get your things. That's not who I am. And more importantly, it's not what would have been best for my children. What I did instead was think. I spent 2 weeks thinking, and during those 2 weeks, I also started making very quiet, very deliberate preparations. The first thing I did was call a divorce attorney. One I'd researched carefully, not someone anyone in Lena's family would know. Her name was Petra Voss, and she had a reputation for being thorough in a way that made opposing attorneys visibly tired. I met with Petra and laid out everything. She listened, asked precise questions, and then told me what my position would look like. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which meant a clean 50-50 wasn't guaranteed, but wasn't guaranteed to go my way either. Petra's advice: document everything, change nothing in behavior yet, and do not, under any circumstances, tip my hand before we had structured the financial picture correctly. The second thing I did was contact my bank privately. 3 years earlier, I'd begun quietly building a consulting side practice. Smaller projects, individual clients, work I did on evenings and weekends. It had grown to the point where it was generating real income. Because I'd been organized about it from the start, the paper trail was clean. Separate accounts, separate LLC, separate everything. Petra reviewed it and confirmed that under Ohio law, income from a business established and operated entirely outside the marital estate had strong grounds to be classified as separate property. Not guaranteed, but strong. The third thing I did was wait. Lena, to her credit, was a good actress. She probably could have kept going indefinitely if she'd wanted to, but something shifted around month 2 of my quiet preparations. She became almost warm. Started suggesting date nights, touching my arm when she talked to me, asking about my projects at work with apparent interest. It took me about a week to understand what had changed. Diana told her about a life insurance restructuring my father-in-law was doing, and Lena had interpreted it as a sign that there might be more family money moving around soon than she'd previously calculated. The warmth wasn't for me. It was for the updated spreadsheet. I played along. I was pleasant, agreeable, gave her nothing to point to. Inside, I was finishing everything Petra and I had set in motion. What I had not anticipated was Colt. About 6 weeks into my quiet preparations, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man identified himself as working in risk assessment for a company I didn't know. He asked me a series of oddly specific questions about a commercial property project I consulted on 3 years ago, the timeline, my billing structure, who had signed off on my work. I answered straightforwardly because I had nothing to hide. But afterward, I called Petra. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "Who in your wife's family would have a reason to build a paper trail against your professional credibility?" Colt, who had spent years watching me sit at family dinners, who had filed me somewhere unfavorable in his own mental spreadsheet, and who had apparently connected enough dots to realize that if my professional reputation took damage at the right moment, Lena's divorce position would look significantly better. I have no absolute proof of this. What I have is the timing, Colt's professional network in real estate and finance, and the fact that 3 weeks later a second vague inquiry was made to a licensing board about a project I'd done in 2019, a project that had passed every inspection and had 0 substantive complaints. I called an attorney who specialized in professional licensing defense. I got ahead of it. The inquiries went nowhere because there was nothing to find. But I understood then that this wasn't just a divorce. It was a coordinated effort, and I needed to treat it accordingly. Petra had advised me to say nothing and change nothing. I'd been following that. But I started paying closer attention to what was being built around me, and I started making records of my own. I want to skip ahead slightly here because some of the middle section of this story is mostly paperwork, and paperwork is not interesting to describe even when it's important. What I will tell you is that by the time I finally had the conversation with Lena, I had spent 4 months preparing. Every financial document organized, business valuation prepared, Rita's complete file, records of the licensing inquiries and my responses, Petra fully briefed and ready. I chose a Sunday evening in February. The kids were at Diane and Gerald's for the weekend. Lena had arranged it, ironically, for a reason I won't go into here. We were alone in the house. I sat down at the kitchen table. I poured 2 glasses of water. I told Lena we needed to talk. She sat down with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed the possibility of this conversation and decided she was prepared for it. She crossed her legs, set her phone face down on the table, and said, "Okay." I told her I knew about Gordon. I told her I knew about the apartment. I told her I knew how long it had been going on, and I told her that I had documentation. I said all of this without raising my voice, without leaning forward, without any of the emotional performance she might have expected. I was, as I said, methodical. Lena didn't cry. "I'll give her that." She went very still, and then she said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. She thought for a moment, recalibrating. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She got honest. Not remorseful. Honest. She said that the marriage hadn't been working for years, that she hadn't known how to say it, that Gordon had been a mistake that became something more. She said she thought we could handle this like adults. She said she'd already spoken to an attorney. "So have I," I said. Another recalibration. "Who?" "Petra Voss." She knew the name. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened slightly. "Good." We didn't say much more that night. She called her mother. I went and sat in the backyard until it was dark, and then I went to bed. What followed over the next several months was not a war, exactly. It was more like a chess match, played by people who had both decided to be the one who didn't blink. Lena's attorney was aggressive, pushed hard on my consulting business, tried to characterize it as marital income. Petra pushed back with documentation going back to the LLC's formation date, my separate account records, every invoice and contract. Lena's side tried to argue that I had benefited from marital stability during the years I'd built the business, that without the household infrastructure Lena had maintained, I wouldn't have had the time or resources to develop the consulting practice. It was not, I have to say, a ridiculous argument. Petra had anticipated it. We had prepared a counter-narrative, records of every school pickup I'd done, every medical appointment I'd taken the kids to, every weekend I'd spent on home maintenance while Lena was, as the documentation showed, otherwise engaged. The counter-narrative was that the marital stability I'd enjoyed was one I'd largely created myself. Colt made one more move. He contacted a client of mine directly, a developer I'd worked with twice, a good professional relationship, and implied, without any specifics, that I was under professional review. The developer called me, somewhat confused, and I explained the situation and provided documentation of the resolved licensing inquiries. The relationship survived. But I'd had enough. I called Colt. I want to be careful about what I say here, because some of it touches on things that are still technically ongoing. What I will say is that I had accumulated, in the course of my preparations, some information about Colt's business dealings that he would not have wanted scrutinized too closely. I am not a person who blackmails people. I made that very clear in the conversation. What I told him was this: I have no interest in your business. I have no interest in hurting you, but I need you to understand that if you interfere in my life again, I will have no choice but to share what I know with people who do have that interest. I said it quietly, without drama, and I meant every word of it. Colt did not make any further moves. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that February conversation. Lena received half of the marital equity in the house, her car, a settlement amount that Petra negotiated down from what Lena's side had initially demanded, and a shared custody arrangement that I actually wanted. I wanted my kids, and I fought for real joint custody, not the performative kind. We got it. Every other week, I pick Nina and Braden up from school, and they're with me in the new apartment I found about 2 miles from their school. We have dinner together. We do homework. Braden has brought 4 separate dinosaur books into my apartment and lined them up on a shelf he considers to be his. My consulting business, which remains separate property, has continued to grow. I brought on 2 additional engineers this year. We completed a commercial project in Nashville in the spring that was the largest contract I've ever signed on my own. It still doesn't feel entirely real sometimes. Lena and Gordon are together. I know this because Nina mentioned it with the matter-of-fact casualness of a 9-year-old who has decided to accept the geography of her life. They apparently live in the short north. I have no feelings about this that I haven't already processed. Diane, my former mother-in-law, made one attempt to maintain a relationship, sent me a card after the divorce which I thought was either genuine or strategic, and I decided it didn't matter which. Gerald sent me a text that said only, "I'm sorry things went this way. You were always decent to us." I appreciated that more than I expected to. Colt's commercial real estate firm lost a significant anchor tenant last year and has been publicly restructuring. I have no hand in that. I simply noticed. Priya, Colt's wife, apparently asked Lena at some point during the divorce proceedings why she'd waited so long to file if she was so unhappy. Lena's answer, according to a mutual friend who probably shouldn't have told me but did, "I kept thinking the situation would improve." I thought about that a lot. I think she meant financially. I think she was waiting for Gerald's estate planning to crystallize, for my business to become something she'd get credit for the numbers to make sense. They never quite did the way she'd imagined them. Here's the thing nobody tells you about methodical people. We are very good at waiting. We can hold a position for a long time without giving anything away. I spent 16 years building a career, 4 years building a separate business, 4 months building a legal and financial position, and 8 months going through a divorce process. And at no point did I lose control of what I was doing, even when I very much wanted to. The night the divorce was finalized, I picked up Nina and Braden and we went to this diner they both love. A loud, bright place that puts too much butter on everything. We sat in a booth and they both ordered pancakes for dinner because I said they could. Braden told me at length about a species of sauropod he'd recently researched. Nina showed me something she'd drawn in her sketchbook. I drank bad coffee and listened to my kids talk, and I thought, this is the part that worked. This is the part I did right. Whatever else I got wrong, and I got things wrong, I stayed too long without acting, I trusted too much, I made myself too convenient. I did not let those years take my children from me, and I did not let the chaos of how it ended define what came after. I am 45 now. I live 2 miles from my kids' school. I have work I'm proud of, partners I trust, a small apartment that I have slowly, deliberately made into a home. I have not yet started dating again seriously. I'm in no hurry. I've learned, more than I wanted to, that I'm quite good at waiting until something is worth the effort. Some of you reading this will say I should have acted sooner. Some of you will say I should have been louder, more dramatic, more visibly furious. Maybe, but fury is expensive, and I needed every resource I had. I made a choice to be patient and precise, and I don't regret it. What I do regret is the Tuesday mornings. All those ordinary Tuesdays when I noticed the absence of something real and found the most generous explanation and moved on. Not because it would have changed the outcome, I don't think it would have, but because I deserved better than the most generous explanation. So did my kids, now I know that. And that, as far as I can tell, is how you go from there to here. I've thought a lot about what actually causes a marriage to fail. Not the affair, not the lies. Those are symptoms. What causes it, in my experience, is a long, slow accumulation of choices where one person decides their comfort matters more than the other person's dignity. Lena didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray me. She made 100 smaller decisions first, to stop trying, to look elsewhere, to calculate rather than feel. And each one made the next one easier. That's how it works. Not in explosions, but in erosions. What I know now that I didn't fully understand then is that how you respond to being wronged matters just as much as the wrong itself. I had every right to be furious. I was furious, I just didn't perform it. I chose to be precise instead, and that choice protected my children, protected my finances, and ultimately protected whatever version of myself I was going to have to live with afterward. Fury is a short-term currency. It spends fast and leaves you with nothing. Clarity compounds. Colt tried to damage my professional reputation because he believed that a man under threat would make mistakes. He was probably right about most people. What he miscalculated was that I had spent 20 years being underestimated in that family, and I had gotten very practiced at not giving people what they expected. When you've been filed underperforming asset long enough, you learn to find a kind of freedom in it. Nobody watches the person they've already dismissed. I use that. The thing about intelligence, real practical intelligence, not the kind you perform at dinner parties, is that it only works when it's patient. I was patient. I gathered information. I built my position slowly, methodically, without announcing any of it. And when the moment came, I wasn't scrambling. I was ready. That readiness was the product of years of quiet work that nobody in Lena's family had ever bothered to notice. Their oversight became my advantage. As for the integrity piece, I could have done damage I didn't do. I knew things about Colt's business that could have caused him real harm. I chose not to use them beyond what was necessary to make him stop, not because I was being generous, but because I understood something he didn't, that winning by destroying everything around you leaves you standing in rubble. I wanted to build something. You can't build and burn at the same time. Nina is 10 now. Brayden has memorized the names of more prehistoric animals than I thought existed. They are, in their ordinary, complicated 9- and 7-year-old way, completely fine. Maybe better than fine. They have a father who shows up every other week without fail, who sits in a diner booth and lets them order pancakes for dinner, who listens when they talk. That didn't happen by accident. I fought for it specifically, because I understood it was the only outcome that actually mattered. If there is any lesson I'd offer from all of this, it's not dramatic. It's just this. The person who stays composed when they have every reason not to will almost always outlast the person who doesn't. Not because life is fair. It isn't. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something, but because composure gives you options, and options give you leverage, and leverage, used carefully and ethically, gives you a life you actually chose, rather than one that was chosen for you by people who were counting on you to fall apart. I didn't fall apart, and here I am.